Let's talk about dirty jobs. Not the kind where you're covered in mud or grime. I'm talking about the kind of job that makes you socially dirty. The kind that isolates you, that makes people whisper when you walk by. Matthew had one of those jobs. He was a tax collector in Capernaum, a bustling fishing town on the Sea of Galilee. His office wasn't a corner suite with a view, it was a dusty, open-air booth right on the main trade route. Day in and day out, he sat there, the gatekeeper of commerce. His existence revolved around taking money from his own people to give to a foreign power. It was necessary, sure, but it came with a heavy price. His daily routine was a relentless grind. Imagine the scene. The sun beats down. Dust from caravans and donkey carts swirls. The smell of fish mixes with livestock and sweat. In first-century Judea, being a tax collector or a publican wasn't just an unpopular profession. It was a mark of shame. These men were seen as traitors, plain and simple. They worked for the Roman Empire, the occupying force that had stripped their nation of its sovereignty. Every tax they collected was a bitter reminder of that foreign rule. To make matters worse, the system was ripe for corruption. Tax collectors would win contracts by bidding for the right to collect taxes in a district. Anything they collected above the contracted amount was theirs to keep. This created a powerful incentive for extortion, squeezing every last coin out of hardworking farmers, fishermen, craftsmen. So, when people looked at Matthew, they didn't just see a man doing a job. They saw a symbol of oppression and greed. He was lumped in with the worst of society. Sinners, religious leaders like the Pharisees were especially harsh. They taught tax collectors were ritually unclean, their money was tainted. Matthew was an outcast in his own hometown, living on the fringes of his community. Imagine that social isolation. Then one day, the routine was broken. It started like any other day. The sun, the dust, the noise, the endless stream of people. Matthew was likely hunched over his table. His focus narrowed to the task at hand. His senses dulled to the familiar drone of the marketplace. But then, a different kind of presence cut through the noise. It was Jesus of Nazareth. By this time, Jesus was no stranger to Capernaum. He had been teaching in the synagogue. He had performed miracles that had everyone talking, a figure of intense curiosity, a rabbi whose authority unsettled and captivated. But he was a holy man, a teacher, exactly the kind of person who would have no business with a man like Matthew. Jesus approached the tax booth. This alone would have been unusual. Most rabbis and respectable people made a wide circle around this den of unclean money and Roman collaboration. But Jesus didn't just walk past. He stopped. He stopped and looked right at Matthew. This was a look that seemed to see past the tax collector and into the man sitting there. For a moment, the bustling marketplace faded into the background. Then Jesus spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the market's clamor with absolute clarity. He said just 2 words. "Follow me." That's it. No long speech, no list of prerequisites, no demand for an immediate apology, no promise to change. Just a simple, direct, and utterly shocking invitation. Follow me. It was an invitation to leave everything behind. The booth, the coins, the security, the shame, and to start a new life. It was an offer to trade a job that isolated him for a journey that promised community. It was a call to a different kind of accounting, one not of money, but of meaning. The moment Jesus uttered those 2 words, a collective gasp must have rippled through the onlookers. You could have heard a pin drop in the middle of that busy street. Jaws dropped. Eyes widened. People turned to each other, whispering in disbelief. Did you hear that? He can't be serious. The Pharisees and scribes who were undoubtedly in the crowd would have been absolutely scandalized. This was a major breach of protocol. A holy man, a rabbi, willingly associating with a publican? This was not just a quiet, personal moment. Jesus chose to do this in the middle of the day at the center of commerce. He wasn't hiding his association with Matthew. He was challenging the social and religious gatekeepers. He was demonstrating that his mission was not just for the pious. What happened next is just as radical as the initial call. Matthew stood up. He left the coins on the table. He left the ledgers. He left the inkwells. He left the entire apparatus of his old life, and he followed Jesus. His first act as a follower was to throw a party. He went home and hosted a great feast, and he invited Jesus and his new disciples. But who else did he invite? Not the town's respectable citizens or the religious leaders. He invited his friends. The Bible tells us it was a large crowd of tax collectors. In other words, he invited all the other outcasts. Imagine the scene at that dinner. The house would have been filled with the very people that polite society shunned. And right in the middle of them all, reclining at the table, eating and drinking with them, was Jesus. This was more than just a meal. Matthew's life was turned upside down in the best possible way. One minute he was a wealthy but despised outcast, his identity tied to a pile of Roman coins. The next, he was a disciple of the most compelling spiritual figure of his time. He traded his tax booth for the open road. He exchanged a life of calculated extortion for a life of radical generosity and faith. The man who had spent his days taking from people was now part of a movement dedicated to giving. It was a 180-degree turn, a complete transformation of purpose, identity, community. He was no longer Matthew the tax collector, he was Matthew the apostle. This change wasn't just internal, it had to be navigated in the real world. His former colleagues in the tax collecting business would have been bewildered. Why would anyone walk away from that kind of money? His family might have been relieved that he was leaving a shameful profession, but terrified by the uncertainty of his new path. And what about his new companions? The choice of Matthew was a calculated move. It was a deliberate, symbolic act that revealed the very heart of Jesus' message. In that culture, there were clear lines drawn in the sand. There were insiders and outsiders, the religiously observant, the morally upright, the socially acceptable, the sick, the poor, the Gentiles, the tax collectors, the sinners. By calling Matthew, Jesus took a stick and drew a new line, one that erased all the old ones. He was declaring that his kingdom was open to anyone. This was a direct challenge to the religious establishment. The Pharisees believed holiness came through separation and law. They created fences around the law to keep people from even getting close to sinning. Jesus demonstrated a different kind of holiness, a holiness so robust it wasn't contaminated by contact with sin. Instead, it cleansed and transformed sin. So, what's the takeaway for us today, living in 2025? The story of Matthew's call from his tax booth isn't just a quaint historical account. First and foremost, it's a powerful reminder that no one is beyond hope. We all have our own tax booths. The jobs, the habits, the past mistakes, the labels that we feel define us and trap us. We can feel stuck, defined by our worst moments, convinced that we're too far gone for a second chance. Matthew's story shouts from the rooftops that this is simply not true. Change is possible. This story also challenges us to look at others the way Jesus did. It's easy to write people off. We do it all the time. We label people based on their job, their politics, their social media posts, their past. Jesus invites us to do the opposite. He invites us to see the person behind the label. And that call, "Follow me," is still being offered today. It's an invitation to leave behind the things that trap us and to step into a new story, a new purpose, a new identity. Just like Matthew, all we have to do is get up and follow.